Welcome, everyone. Give it a few more seconds. Now we have quite a few people sign up for this session, which is great. So excited. Hi, Stephanie. Hi, Paige. Hi, Logan. It's like a little roll call. I enjoy this part. Hi, Marion. Hope I got your name right, Marion. Great to see you come through. Hi, Jacob. Thank you for spending a Thursday evening with us as we explore research and archives and how it intersects with artistic practices. My name is Alika and I work with NIA Center for the Arts. And tonight's session is part of our Left of Center program. And as I was thinking about tonight, I actually came across an article today that was really interesting for me. It was an article about a 250-year-old tree that the city of Toronto was buying off of a couple, essentially buying their property in order to preserve the tree. And I was thinking about at the time, like, how important tonight's session is, because I often say artists are part of our ecosystem of history, and historians, they're often the first folks who actually document things that happen in our communities. But that article made me think about our natural environment and how important trees and rivers are, and flowers and plants are also part of witnessing what happens on these lands, whether we're here or it's 250 years ago, and who knows what was happening at that time. So as part of my reflections on this moment, as I think about my connection to the lands, I'm really thinking about and being grateful for the ecosystem and the natural environment and the ways that it both documents our history, our human activity, but is also a key part of enabling our human activity, and has its own life and ecosystem that I hope we're all encouraged to explore and learn more about. So that 250-year-old tree is part of my reflection tonight. And I'm also thinking about giving thanks to the original caretakers of this land, the Huron-Wendat Nation, the Métis Nation of Ontario, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, and the Six Nations of the Grand River. We are all, thinking about as well the lands of the city of Toronto. That's where I'm coming into from tonight. So I encourage you all in the places and communities that you're a part of to think about your relationship to the lands and the Indigenous communities that came before us and you. We also acknowledge all treaty peoples tonight, including those who came here as migrants, either in this generation or in previous generations, and those who came here involuntarily as part of the transatlantic slave trade. We're going to be talking about research, we're going to be talking about diaspora, Black folks, how we show up in research and archives and institutional settings and non-institutional settings. And I think our elders will be very pleased that we'll be bringing in their energy, bringing in, their unseen work and labor and existence, and searching for them and learning how to search for them with Dr. Cheryl Thompson and Shaya Ishaq. So welcome all of you, and welcome, of course, our two special guests for tonight. As I mentioned, this event is hosted by NIA Center for the Arts. We are a Black arts organization based in Toronto. We offer a wide variety of opportunities for young people to explore their creativity, for artists to showcase their work to new audiences, and as well to have opportunities to learn with and from each other. And that's part of tonight's intention, to create opportunities for artists and creatives and folks who are interested to explore archives and research as a tools to support their artistic practice. So as part of that, I'm going to introduce Dr. Cheryl Thompson. Hey, Cheryl. Very excited to have her here tonight. A bit about Cheryl: she's the assistant professor in creative industries at the Creative School at Ryerson University. She's also the author, a writer. We were just talking about her call to be a writer, truly a God-given gift. The author of Uncle, Race, Nostalgia, and the Politics of Loyalty, which just came out this year, as well as Beauty in a Box, Detangling the Roots of Canada's Black Beauty Culture, which came out in 2019. Dr. Thompson is currently working on her third book on Canada's history of Blackface in performance and as well anti-Black racism, really important topics. So thank you for that labor. I would also mention that, as an academic, Dr. Thompson is, involved in work and scholarly work both in Toronto and Canada and internationally. And she holds a PhD in communication studies from McGill University. and more recently, I have to shout you out, was named to the Royal Society of Canada's College of New Scholars, Artists, and Scientists. Should we get some love?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that.
Welcome. And Shaya Ishaq, we're going to talk to a bit later, but I'll introduce her now. She's an interdisciplinary artist, truly, an artist, a designer, a writer, a researcher, and she has engaged in a number of research interests, including craft, diaspora, design, anthropology, and design and Afrofuturism. She's very devoted to materiality. She works with textiles, clay, and wood to create wearable art, jewelry, as well as art installations. And we're going to see a bit of her work tonight in a variety of these realms. She has studied fibers and material practices at Concordia University. And she is currently based in Montreal, also known as, I just learned this today, Tiohtiá, which is the Indigenous term for the area. Thank you for joining us, Shaya. So, Cheryl, over to you.
Yes.
I want to quickly, before you start, let everyone know, I know folks have been on Zoom for a while now, but you can feel free to put your reactions. If you're hearing something that you're excited about, you can put that in the chat. If you have questions that come up over the course of Cheryl's talk, you can put those in the Q&A, and we will have a time for Q&A after Cheryl's presentation. And then after we hear from Cheryl and get a bit into the premise of research, we will hear from Shaya about how she's incorporated research practices into her artistic practice and have some Q&A there. So chat for the hype as if you're here, just talking to us, and then Q&A for direct questions. And I'll be here to support you folks if you need anything.
Okay, great. So I'm going to share my screen with everyone. Welcome, everyone. I am so excited for this presentation. I was hyping up this event as the research methods class you wish you took when you were in school. And if you're still in school, this is the research methods class you wish you could take. So I'm putting the energy out there to make it real. So one day I am giving this same lecture in an actual class, but I'm loving that I'm giving it to the public. So let me stop rambling, as I can do, and get on with what I've done here today. So what we're really going to do is, I consider this to be archive/research 101. Okay. But it's arts-based. It's an arts-based approach to thinking about research and thinking about methods. It's not your standard way that I feel like methods in research are taught in university, which tends to skew towards the social sciences, as if everyone wants to be a sociologist. I have geared this specifically for artists and people who are creatives, and how you should think about your work as you go address the archives and doing research. So the first part, it's going to be about 40 minutes. We're going to just go through the basics of, like, what is arts-based research methods? What are the different types of archives? A lot of people don't realize that no two archives are the same. There's actually a branch of different types of archives, and it's really important to know that, so that you know what to expect when you go into a different place. Then my whole thing in life, especially for those who have seen me speak publicly, or some of my students who might be here, hi students, is that you have to know to ask questions. And asking questions is not just of someone else. Part of the work of being, I think, an artist, it's a very similar experience as being an academic, is that you also ask questions of yourself. So there's an interrogation process that you also need to do of yourself before you actually even think of going into an archive. And then there's a different interrogation process that happens when you actually go to the archive. So we're going to talk about that in the first session. Then we come back, the second session, we're going to talk a little bit about ethics. And then I'm going to get into the call and response part of this presentation. That's me literally using my skills to look at 3 images and sort of guide you through on how you would address what you're seeing in the images, and how you would use that information to lead to the work of research, archive, and then if you're an artist, your art, using it in your art. Bear in mind, I saw these images literally 3 hours ago. So I just, full disclosure, I have not had weeks and weeks. I literally just saw them. And I thought I would do that to show you just a natural reaction of how you can see something and kind of just, without being too learned, take it somewhere. So let's begin. So the first thing is, what is research? It sounds so pedantic. Like, why is she going through? I already know what research is, but I think a lot of people don't know what it means when I say, did you do your research? It is the systematic investigation into and study of materials and sources in order to establish facts and reach new conclusions. That's a noun. That's the typical definition, but I like the verb. It's just to investigate systematically, okay? Forget the noun. Think about the verb. Verbs are action. That's literally what research is. You are investigating something in a systematic way, which means you have to develop a system. It's not ad hoc, where you just go and guess and make, no. You have to decide for yourself, what are your questions? What's your object? What's your of inquiry or your subject of inquiry? What are your questions? And then overall, what's your goal? What is your aim? What do you hope to achieve? Part of research is being very systematic in terms of your process. And so that's the first part to this, to really understand. I want everyone from this day forward to think of research as a verb, not as a noun. I think that will actually help you, because it really is in the doing, not in the so-called establishing of facts and conclusions. Let's leave that to the scientists. You're artists. Artists don't need facts and conclusions. You want to be able to explore something. And so then, what is arts-based research? It's kind of a bit, it's tied in, but it's a specific niche that we're really getting at when we speak to arts-based research. So the first thing, I'm just quoting here from this article that I've left the citation because I kind of liked it. They say it's research that uses the arts in the broadest sense to explore, understand, represent, and even challenge human action and experience. I think sometimes when you're an artist or you're creative, you don't see yourself as a researcher. But understand that if you are a creative, everything you do related to your craft is basically research. And increasingly in academia, they have literally created a term, arts-based research, to acknowledge that fact. And if you are a creative, chances are you're also doing something that is looking to push us forward, to make us think and feel and to emote. And so to that end, the research tends to be very socially engaged, right? And it's also research that you're always looking for collaboration and participation. You're in dialogue with a community, a person, or the work itself, or history. And it's an immersive experience where you want people to, through affect, right? You're looking to elicit a reaction out of people. So that means that your focus is not on facts and figures. It's on feeling. It's on emotions. But at the same time, remember what I just said a little while ago, research is systematic. You need questions. You're trying to generate, oftentimes when people hear the word data, they think computer data. No, everything is data, okay? Just like everything is copy. Have you ever seen that documentary? Everything is data. It's not just facts and figures and numbers, right? It could be anything that you gather from examining something becomes data. Then you have to analyze it, and then you think about ways of presenting research. In academia, or probably through your education, whether it's primary, high school, university, college, or life education, people have probably told you that the way you present your results is through a PowerPoint presentation. Arts-based research, presenting your research could be a dance movement. It could be sculpture that we were talking about earlier before I joined the call. It could be a film. It could be a script. Thinking about yourself as a creative means that you have to imagine these words as it relates to your craft, not thinking you have to fit your craft into what you think these words mean. The words have to have meaning for you. And so again, as an artist and creative, what is your intention? Your intention is always thinking about an audience, right? You're engaging with an audience and there's a sense of participation and you want to transform people, your community, society writ large. And so research for the artists, the arts-based research, is always about the things that I'm talking about. And often, I think what prevents artists from doing research or thinking that they can do research is that they have this social science framework in their head and they think they need to fit that to do the work. What I hope you take away from this few minutes that I'm talking is that, no, you are in charge. You can make the research fit your art. Okay, that's going to become even more clear as we go on. And so arts-based research, right? What are the different forms? I was putting this together, I was thinking, well, what are the different ways that we think about the arts? There's the visual arts, which tend to be drawing, sculpture, painting, photography, even animation, digital storytelling of some kind. There's the sound arts. Think of people who work in radio or soundscape or even sound installations or music, right? You're a music artist. The literary arts, which tend to be the traditional way that we think of arts, poetry, you're writing fiction or nonfiction. Performing arts, theater, dance, spoken word, poetry. And then there's new medias, people working with digital technologies, AI, AR, machine learning, object recognition. Increasingly, people are finding ways to bring the digital technologies into the art world, and people are increasingly considering those as kinds of art forms. We're going to return to this because I want you to really understand, if you work in any of these fields, archives and research are for you. Okay? You can do both. And we're going to return to how you can bring your art into the archive and into the research. And so the next thing is really, for the next 10 minutes or so, I really want to just have a conversation about defining what an archive actually is, because I think a lot of people are intimidated about archives because they think it's some obtuse building that you have to go into and nobody's gonna, and you don't fit, right? You're not a researcher. But I love this quote here by Farber from 2015, where they say the archive is not considered an inert repository for historical information. This is actually quoting Ann Stoller from 2002. A neutral, benign, transparent record whose meaning is stable, definitive, and static. No, the archive is aligned with dynamic, fluid processes of knowledge production, systems, and formations. So if we think about knowledge, systems, and formation, right there, maybe someone can put in the Q&A if they have a thought. Think, what is the word, the one word that would, or maybe you could put this in the chat, I guess. What is the one word that would define knowledge production, systems, and formations? Think about a one word. I'm ready to give you all a clue. It ends with an R. And it's 5 letters. It ends with an R. It's 5 letters. What is that? Just put your thoughts in the chat. That connects knowledge production, systems, and formations. A 5-letter word that ends with an R. Come on, people. I'm seeing paper. Come on, think. I'll give you another letter. It ends in an ER. If I give you the first letter, that's too easy. It ends in an ER. Power. Thank you, Beck. Power. Knowledge production, systems, and formations. That is all about power. So understand, every archive, there's a power dynamic with an archive. An archive is not neutral. It is not benign. It is not a repository that just holds information. There is a power dynamic in how the knowledge is stored and how you can access it, how the systems are even functioning, the formation in terms of what you need to search to know what to find, And then think about the knowledge that is held at archives. So power is always in the room. And the way you address issues of power is not to be afraid of it and not always to think that you're in opposition. It's just to ask questions. So power always needs to be challenged. It doesn't mean it needs to be opposed, where you're always in oppositional stance, but you always need to question power because power is always taken for granted. And anything that's taken for granted needs to be questioned, especially when it holds literally so much power in our lives. And so moving on from the archive, the definition is to think about the different types of archives. Again, there are actually 3 different types of archives that are very different. There's public, university, and private. I make the distinction between public and university, even though universities are public, because university archives require a certain level of access that isn't the same as a public archive. What is a public archive? Public libraries, city archives, or county or regional records management buildings, institutions, because some of the archives are called records management. They usually also have public exhibitions, launches, screens, and other events. Now, a public archive, what is a public? What does it mean to be a public? You could just put this into the chat. Like if you hear a public archive, what do you interpret that to mean? Right, I'm seeing easily accessible. Stephanie says open access, free. Thank you, Alicia. Exactly, free is the big one. Yep, open access, exactly. You all get that. It's free. Anyone can go, anyone can have access. You don't need any special membership. If it's a public library, you might just need a library card, but that's free. So you really don't need, all the public archives are literally for the public. There is no limitation. The university archives are a little bit different. So these archives typically is where institutional memory is held. They play a role in the institution, or the records management somehow are attached to the institution. So for example, typically records that are held in a university, either they were donated by someone who formerly worked there, there's a connection between the university and the archive itself. For example, at X University, we have the Kodak collection, and that's because the university had a long existing relationship with Kodak. So that collection was donated to the university. And so university archives often require you to be a student. It's not some you could be the public who wants to come in and look at records, but typically you need to be a student. And so what does it mean if you're a student? That means you need a student card. You need some kind of verifiable way to identify you as a student, in addition to the student card. What project are you working on? I see Diana is asking, could you be alum? You know, that's an excellent question. That's a question you have to ask, because every university archive is different, right? So, but thank you for your question, because what I'm really trying to say is that the university level, there's a gatekeeper. The public archive, there's no gatekeepers. Anyone has access. The minute you get university level, know that there's a gatekeeper who's going to want to check and verify what it is that you're doing. They might even ask you what the project is about, depending on what the archive is. And so knowing that going in means that you have to do your work in advance. And I'm going to get to that soon. You have to do the work to assess. Why am I going to this archive? What is it that I need? What questions do I need to ask? And then Stephanie is making a bit of a joke. You need a friend with a student card, or that could just be you. And then there's the private archive. And honestly, a private archive is really a private person or a non-public person, or even an organization that is private. Right? It could be a business, a charity, a religious body, like churches, for example. Although churches are a little bit different, because often churches believe in the public, right? They open themselves to the public. That doesn't mean you can look at the private records of the church unless you are a member or you're part of the board, right? So there's different levels here. And then of course, private individuals. But why I'm showing this to you and the pyramid, for my students who are here, I love graphics. It's to get you to understand the higher up on the pyramid is less gatekeeping. I didn't just choose this pyramid for random. The lower, more gatekeeping. So the private archive is very tightly protected for obvious reasons. It's private. They don't know what you're going to do with it. They don't know what your intentions are. They don't have to let you see anything. And understand in this pyramid, the university and private archives, which require the gatekeeping, also mean that you as an artist or a creative or just a person who has questions needs to build relationships a lot more. So there's more relationship building with private people and organizations than there are with the public library. You just go in there, you don't know anybody, okay? You don't even have to talk to anyone. A private, so bear that in mind when you're doing, your work, that whenever you're dealing with a private person or organization, you have to build a relationship with them. You can't expect them to just give you what you want, because they don't have to. A lot of it is trust and relationship building. And that's why understanding these different types of archives is really going to help you to assess where it is that you might start your journey. And often, I know in my own career, I've always started my journey at the place that had less gatekeeping. So I usually went to the public archives first. Right. And you're asking another great question, Diana. Is there a cost to using private archives? Well, again, that's another question to ask, because maybe some might say no, and some might say yes, there is a fee because it's private. The university public archives are always free and accessible, outside of the fact that you need to be a student. So technically you're paying for the university archive because you're a student. That's why you have access. And so moving on to the prep work, right? So you're preparing your visit, you're ready to go, you have your object, you figure it out, you need to develop a method, and then the questions. So I'm going to take you through this. I see I'm kind of running back on time, so I'm going to make up time. But here's the thing. When you get to this stage, the thing is, say you have an object of inquiry. We're going to get to this later on in the seminar, because I'm going to actually go through some images. But say you found a photograph or you found a sculpture or something and you think it's really valuable. Before you leave your house, okay? These are the questions you ask before you leave your house. You start to think yourself, it's always the questions, how, what, and where. So first, how am I going to find out information about this subject or object? Like, you actually have to say, how am I going to do it? Like, question yourself, and maybe write these questions down. Just write down the questions first. Don't try to answer anything. Then you're like, okay, after that, what am I actually looking to answer? Like, what about this that I'm actually questioning? So you have to start to develop a practice of questioning things. I know in many communities like my own, you ask too many questions, they say you're too inquisitive, you're too nosy. We have to get over that, because questions is what leads you to the work, right? The last thing is, then after it's the how, the what are the questions, then it's like, where do I start to get my questions answered? Where would you start? So quickly, I just want to pose this as another question. You found an object. Where would you start? Just put some random stuff in the chat. Where would you begin? You got something, you kind of know what you want. So where's the first place you're going to go? Anna, thank you so much. You know what? This question is over. Anna has answered. Anna has basically answered the question. It's real. In the 21st century, please, people, don't go start looking in books. Google it. It's just real. Go to a computer and start to search databases that you can find. So, or if you're a student, go into the library database. And I mean this. A lot of people don't understand keywords. You want to think of the computer as the basic level of everything. So I put down some keywords, like say if I was interested in, I found some artifact and it's a photograph from an art school in the 1970s. Instead of racking my brain to find the name of the school, I used the keywords that was going to lead me to that question, to answering my question about the arts photo that I found. So when you think of keywords, just my own best practices, you always want to think of date, place, topic. So every time, and always do things in threes if possible. It's like this, the magic of three. Every time you put in a keyword search for something, try to include a date, a place, and a topic. That's how you're going to get a result back. Often what stumps people in the early stages of researching something is they're like, I can't find anything. Believe me, students email me all the time. Like, I can't find anything on Black beauty culture. I'm like, really? Did you try putting in Black beauty culture, 1990s, Naomi Campbell? Just as an example. You're probably going to get some results. So you have to always think of your keywords as triple, always a triple. Then after you've done that, you've done some work, you found some things, honestly, you have to read. We just have to understand that nothing happens without reading. It could be any kind of level, books, articles, web stories, doesn't matter. You have to get used to finding something and engaging with it and summarize key points and pinpoint gaps or absences. People always ask me when they see all the books, did you read all those books? No, I summarized those books though. I skimmed all my books. Did I read all of them? Okay, I read maybe 70% of them, but 30% I just skimmed and looked for what I needed and I summarized. So often this is the basis of becoming a learned person on the topic. So 1970s Toronto arts education, I would read up as much as I could about arts education. Then I would maybe, another keyword search if I was looking into this is that I would narrow it down to the different regions in the city. East York arts education, 1970s. Scarborough arts education, 1970s, right? I would start to like widen out my scope and create these clusters. And then I would read and read. Then after that, I got my keywords, I got my wisdom. Then I need to say, okay, I need some methods. I need to have a system. Remember what research is, a systematic process. I'm paraphrasing. You have to have methods if you're going to do anything systematically. And so the methods, how do you develop a method? Well, here's what a method is. You could see again, many definitions, a particular form of procedure for accomplishing or approaching something, especially a systematic or established one. Orderliness of thought or behavior, systematic planning or action. You notice the same word keeps coming up, systematic. A method is not, oh, let me just throw this here and oh, let me just add this. No, a method is very systematic. I think a lot of creatives often feel like, especially if you talk to a musician, like I'm really abstract, or like a painter, I'm just an abstract thinker and I'm this and this. Yes, that's great. But you have to develop both sides of your brain. So you have to learn to be a creative, yes, and work in the abstract. Believe me, I love abstract. I'm at home in between the lines and in between the notes. That's me. But when it comes to research, I have to put on another hat where I develop a very structured system. Because if you don't do things systematically, two things happen. You're not able to sustain it, and you're not able to reproduce it. And the whole point of research is that you can go anywhere and reproduce it, and then you can sustain it throughout your entire career. And so develop a system. And so how do you do that? Understand that typically when it comes to ABR, and especially archives, there's really just 4 methods that people use. People want to be real creative and say, are you going to do all this stuff? No. Keep it simple. These are the core. There's personal narrative. So say you go into an archive, you're interested in a person. You know that going in, your subject is a person. You really want to be looking at diaries, estate wills, letters. I didn't put that on there, but letters, anything that is in the realm of the personal, private, right? Personal narrative is a method where you systematically go through someone's documents and you basically cull together what were they talking about, what were they experiencing, right? Personal narrative is one method. Discourse analysis is another method, typically used for public documents, newspapers, any kind of records that are public, advertisements, magazines, even memoirs that have been maybe made public. You're looking for the storytelling, the structure of the storytelling as you go through. So so if you were doing discourse analysis, you would literally write down as you were reading something, what are the key points that they keep talking about? And eventually you'll realize that, wait a second, there's themes. That's called doing research. And I think often people think research is like this really complicated thing. And the reason you do is because you're not aware of what you're doing. I hope from looking at this screen, you can see if you're reading a newspaper and you're counting and you're going through and looking at what they say and the substance of what they say, guess what? You're doing discourse analysis. That's what it's actually called. Then there's visual analysis, similar to discourse analysis, but it's about images. I'm going to do some visual analysis later on, where I'm going to be looking at the things I mentioned here, the visual elements of what you see: color, line, texture, scale, the representation, the levels of meaning. Images are always working on two levels of meaning. There's the literal, the denotative of what you actually see. Then there's the connotative level. That is the symbolic messages. Typically, you get the symbolic messages through a style of dress, a hat, the decor in the image, the background. So we're going to do a little visual analysis in the next part of the session. And then quickly, content analysis. It sounds really mathematical, but it actually isn't. You're literally just counting, okay? Counting the number of times something shows up, and then you're creating a table and saying, oh, there were this many articles about love and marriage. There were this many articles about debt. And then you create a graph or a table. It sounds really technical, but it actually isn't. And so I think when people understand that methods are not as intimidating as they sound, you can actually begin to see yourself using them. And that leads us to the next part of developing a method for yourself, right? Your own method is basically this. It's like the what and the how, right? So you're not talking about your objects, you're just talking about your method. It's like, what is it that I want to find, that you want to find out? So is it that you're interested in noting the number of something? Like maybe you want to get a number. Understand that's a quantitative method. Maybe you really are interested in something more qualitative, the narrative, the discourse, or the visual. You can do both because mixed methods approaches exist, but you have to be very clear about what it is that you are trying to find out. And I think often, again, methods screw people up because they don't do the pre-work, and then they get in there and they think, oh, I'll make up the method as I go. No, no, no. Next time somebody says, make it up as you go, you should just be like, just hear my voice in your ear saying, don't do that. You have to be systematic. Then the next thing is the how, right? How are you going to investigate your what with your chosen method? How are you going to do it? Like, should you do it in advance? Should you plan? Okay, here's where we get into the nitty-gritty, because the truth is the methods really play themselves out at the archive and then after the archive. And I think some of the things that I'm going to talk about here are really also related to, if you are a person of African descent going into the archive, you really have to understand the dynamic before you show up. And especially if you are a person who is also looking for a person of African descent in the archive, you also have to understand power when you show up. First thing is, and this is really simple stuff, but please find out if you need to book an appointment. A lot of people don't do that. They show up and people are kind of rude, and then they just don't want to go back because like they wouldn't even let me in, but you didn't check if you needed an appointment. The reason they ask for appointments is because often you're dealing with sensitive materials, and even pre-COVID, there's a limit capacity to how many people can be in a reading room. So you actually do need to check in and say, can I come, and find out when they're open to the public, especially. And if it's a private person, find out when they're available. Don't just show up and demand, I want to see this, because it just, again, relationships, right? Next thing is, Do searches of the database before you get there. Find out what collections they have, the name, the item number, right? Get as much information as you can before you've left your house. A lot of people don't realize, but the work of the archive is in the pre-stuff that I'm talking about. The how, the what, asking those questions, figuring out what you want to do, right? And then the next steps, always bring a pencil. Please, people. I can tell you a story in the Q&A of when I went to an archive. I went to the Yale Beinecke library, and the 5-0 that was in the reading room almost wanted to like kick me out because he thought I had a pen. I was like, no, it's a pencil. He had me up against the wall. No, I'm just kidding. But he was like not playing around. So always bring a pencil, because why not a pen? Sensitive materials. They don't want anyone to mark up something and then you've ruined a historical artifact. Next thing, always bring a notepad, please. I don't care if you're digital so-and-so. Buy a quality notepad to take to the archive. Don't buy the dollar store. Okay. Invest in a notepad that is for your archival work, because if you cherish that notepad, I think of it as cherishing ancestors, right? You're writing down the secrets of the dead, so to speak, in this thing. And that's why I actually don't, even though I have a nice laptop, I don't use my laptop for archival work. I don't want to put those precious information into the digital until I know what I'm doing with it. It's just my own practice, do you, but I just really love to keep it close. And so the next thing, oh, I went in the wrong direction. The next thing is to bring a camera and ask if you can use it. A lot of people don't realize, a lot of, especially public university archives, they're like, yeah, of course you can take pictures. And then you're at the archive like, damn, I didn't bring my camera. And then my phone doesn't work, because often they don't want you to use your phone. They tell you no phone in the reading room. So don't rely on your phone. If you want to be doing this work, bring a camera, an actual standalone camera that is also not a phone. Why no phone in the reading room? Because they don't want you on your phone talking to somebody, and people are involved in serious, dedicated work. And so these are just pedantic things that seem simple, but believe it or not, after you've done the first round of questions about the object, you've then figured out some questions about your methods. People often forget this step. And they just like get dressed, leave the house, and roll on down to the archive. And they don't do this. Do this, okay, before you get there. It's going to save you a lot of time and headache. And then while you're at the archive, this is where you start to bring everything together. You start to think, how do you find what you're looking for when you get the collections? But remember, you did that pre-work. You asked yourself questions about the object. You searched the database. You have that knowledge. That's what you lean on when you get the collection that you're looking for. You lean on the pre-work that you've already done. Take notes and bring it with you to remind yourself. Remind yourself, to my example, oh, I'm looking for arts-based education in the 1970s. Okay, when I get this collection, let me make sure I look for anything that points to that topic. That's what I want to find. So as you're sifting through, that's what you're zeroed in on. Okay, then the what. What does it mean when items in the archive are not located where you thought they would be? Oh no, what now? Kind of thing. Go back to your questions. And then start to ask yourself, let me lean into my methods. Remember you said that you were doing a discourse analysis, or say you were doing a discourse analysis for, I'm talking like I was actually talking to a person, but imagine you were doing a discourse analysis. Part of your work in the archive, this is a tip that someone gave me many years ago. It's not just what you see, you're also going to make notes of what you don't see. See the process of the archive as your arts practice. So don't be so zeroed in on object finding. Also take the immersive experience as part of the find. So if you're looking for something and you're like, you had all these methods planned and you can't find what you're looking for, understand that's the process. Use that process. You could turn that into a spoken word, right? A one-woman show on your frustration about being in the archive and not finding anything. It's in the gaps that we answer our questions. And then to the last point, why is this item placed here? Is there a larger significance or a context that is missing? The why and the what is the same thing. Think about the power that you now have to question the archive, to like create literally a method of where you think things should be and why something was missing. So part of the work at the archive is finding what you were looking for, the how, right? But the sort of the exploratory part is the what and the why of when things don't go according to your plan. And so part of doing this work as an artist is to actually anticipate the gaps, anticipate the pause, anticipate I didn't see what I wanted, and to not see that as a source of frustration. I see Janice has raised a hand. Are we going to take questions now or should we wait? I'm almost done this section.
Yeah, you can go through this section and then let's take Janice's question.
Okay, so I'm almost done. I'm almost done this section. So I think that is the end of part one. I knew it. I know my slides. Yes, so I am actually done part one. So now we can get into any questions that I didn't address.
So Janice, do you want to ask your question? You should be able to unmute. Then we can actually do it live, or you can put your question in the Q&A, either or.
Yeah, either or is fine. Or was it an error that Janice pressed the button?
May have been.
I mean, I can keep talking until then. Okay, that was the end of part one. But what I want you to think about is, you know, in the way that I set everything up, I want you to think about, again, going back to power, right? That part of the work, especially if you're talking about, if you're a person of African descent, if you're Indigenous, if you are quote unquote part of the group, the marginalized groups that haven't always been counted in the archive, you literally have to see your work as a political project. You really do. And to not be disappointed through the absences of what you find, but to use the absences to do the work, to fill in those gaps. When I started doing my work, a lot of the reason why people started to pay attention is because I started to write about the absences of what I didn't find or what I couldn't find, instead of being deflated by them. And I asked the questions in advance. So then when I got to the archive, I kind of knew what I was looking for. And when I didn't see it, I kind of knew what to do with it next because I had developed my methods. I was very systematic in my approach. Do we have the question now?
Janice is unmuted. I'm not sure if she's there.
I'm here.
Hey.
Hi.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good.
This is really quite interesting. I'm a senior who still does a lot of research, and I was just wondering if you would have the slides that you've presented available to the people that are online.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can sort that out after the fact.
Okay, that would be great. You've been very helpful. I thought I was doing the right thing over the 90 years that I've been doing research, but you've really added some other tools like a camera for things that I should have been doing and will plan to do in the future. So thank you. It's been very insightful.
Well, you're welcome. And, you know, the thing I would say is that through all the archives that I've been to, I've kind of learned through trial and error in my own work. And what I've learned is that always be prepared for the question that they're going to ask you. So I would always memorize the questions, because after a while, the archivists, they all ask you the same question. And so I would have and I remember I went to one archive and she was like, the person was so impressed. They're like, "You've done this before." I'm like, yes, I have. And so and another advice that I got from someone was that, remember, you need to imagine every trip to the archive as your last trip. Imagine you're never going to get back to this place. So if that's the case, it's literally like all or nothing. And if it's all or nothing, you have to be very prepared in the upfront before you get there, so that you're not there and you think, oh no, I forgot a pencil. Oh no, I don't have my camera. Oh, what are my questions? Why am I here? What's my questions? Like, you just don't want, and I've seen people at archives start to have meltdowns and they actually leave because they realize that they're ill prepared with the collection that they have in front of them.
Right.
So that's my advice. No, thank you. I appreciate it.
Thanks for that comment, Janice. And we have one more question that just came through, kind of broad, and I think it maybe gives us a kind of example. So E. Jones is asking, do you have any recommendations of questions to ask when researching families, I'm thinking / Black history in Canada?
Yes, yes, E. Jones. In fact, I'm going to get to that in the second session when we start dealing with some of the photographs, but I can kind of address it here in like on a tertiary level. The first thing to understand is you have to, it depends on what information you have, right? Do you have a photograph? Do you have a name? Do you have a location, right? You start to like go through the checklist in your head of what you have. What is it that you know just on a basic level? Like maybe you know a name, maybe you know a location, maybe you know a street, maybe you know a school somebody went to, maybe you have a date range that you know the family might have lived here. All of those things need to be noted down on paper. And then you start to think, okay, we live in the 21st century, thank God. Okay, so there are ways that you can find out information about people's names. It could be ancestry.com, right? All those websites that are genealogy. If you don't want to do that and you're hesitant, no problem. If you have a location where you think these people might have lived, then you go to the city records and you can find out simple things about census. You can see a name on a census data. You can find out city scrolls that could even give you a sense if they owned a home. You could see where they might have lived. And so that will narrow it in. And believe it or not, estate wills, people have a will, it gets filed. You could find a will somehow, and that will honestly lead you down a rabbit hole of goodness that will completely shock you. Just by finding one document related to any of that will take you down the path. Yeah. I see some other questions here in the chat. I don't know, do I still have time for?
Yeah, we could do 2 more. Yeah.
Okay, so I see, I think it's Lorena is asking, what would be a great plan of action if you want to access archives from abroad while being in Canada, especially from African Caribbean based archives? Okay, now that is a question. And so what I've actually done that, I've been in Canada and I've accessed archives in the UK, and even archive in Jamaica. So it can be done. Again, Google is your friend. So first you find the archive that you're interested in and you make that connection. People are often surprised that people respond to people via email, like just a random email the archive. And again, come prepared with your details. Do you have a date? Do you have a name? Do you have a person? Do you have a location? Do you have any identifying information that you're trying to find out? Then you know what? You want the shorthand, then you let them do the work. Okay. Let them do their job to search their own records so that you don't have to do that work. So that's actually literally the best approach, is to let people do the job that they do, and then they will help you, because an archivist, an archive, and libraries, believe it or not, those are front-facing jobs. So their job really is public service. They're here to help you. So ask them the questions and let them do the work. Kala, thank you so much. This is fantastic. You're asking, can I speak to any experiences that I've had working with digital or online archives or any non-traditional archives? Yes, I've had tons of experience in digital archives, and it's really the same process. It really is. The only thing that's different with digital archives is that your keywords really have to be honed in. So you kind of have, you can't be as vague with your details than as compared to if you go to a physical archive. You can maybe be a bit more vague. But digital archives, the keywords are key, because remember that digital archive was put together through an algorithmic system that is based on data, i.e. keywords. So the system itself was created through keywords. So you almost have to think like the system in order to find what you're looking for. The traditional archive, yes, it's also through an information system, but because there's such a human element, there's aspects of it that is just different, right? You have someone to ask, it's a physical person, and maybe some things might have been put one way, but they actually just store it somewhere else. A digital archive isn't like that. It's very exact. So the more information you have before you sit down to search that archive, the easier it's going to be for you. Yeah.
Great. I feel like there's so much energy. I'm like, we have a 10-minute break.
Okay.
But I just kind of want to ask people how they're feeling as well. I feel like there's just so much going on. I'm like, do we take maybe a 5-minute break and come back? How are folks feeling? We compare in the chat. Do we need a break? 10-minute break? Well, we're gonna take a break, but everyone should get water.
I'm gonna stop my share, right? I should stop my yep.
Okay, so we're gonna do a 5-minute break. There's lots of energy. People are enjoying the energy, enjoying the conversation, enjoying the tips. Okay, so 5. So we will come back at 7:05. Short break, 5 minutes. So everyone stretch, move your body, get some water, and we'll see you back in 5 minutes. See you. Bye.
Whatever he showed the judge was.
Hope your break was everything you needed it to be in that 5 minutes. Now we're going to move into part 2 of this workshop, where we're going to talk to Shaya Ishaq, a interdisciplinary artist, to kind of talk about some of the practices, research practices that she brings into her artistic practice to kind of bring to life some of the research concepts that we've been talking about. So welcome back, Shaya. How are you doing?
Sorry, hello, hi everybody. Just a moment. We'll share the screen.
I know you're going to show us some images as well of your artwork and your process, so excited to share those with the group.
All right, fantastic.
And once again, folks can put any comments they might have in the chat, and as well questions in the Q&A.
Well, I'm so happy to be here with you all this evening. Thanks for tuning in. And wow, part 1 was so exciting. Really fortunate to be following up after Dr. Thompson. Yes, I am an artist, a interdisciplinary artist, currently based in Montreal, otherwise known as, or Tiohtiá. I'm going to be sharing a little bit about my practice, what I do, how research has a role in it. I would definitely say that research is very much integral to what I do. I'm somebody who works with across the mediums of textiles, ceramics, and woodwork, basically at this moment. I'm very much devoted to materiality, thinking about the histories and like the sort of like technical methods that like follow these particular disciplines. And I as an artist, who thinks about materiality a lot, I honestly have to ask myself a lot, well, what is the material saying? You can't necessarily force a rope or a weaving or thread to do what you want without really spending time with it. So a big part of like my research within my practice is through sampling, but it's only really through sampling and like having a real somewhat of a, it doesn't even have to be a robust concept, but like even just like a negative idea that can help sort of nurture my investigation of these materials is what really leads to that circle, that intersection, which is really the part of research and my own creative process.
I love this design that you created of just like the combinations of your inputs, the materiality, the concept. When you say sampling, do you mean taking an actual sample of a material that you want to work with?
I mean, like, it's part of like in going to like, I've been very much taught how to, like, before you, even when you have like some kind of idea of a weaving project, for example, it takes so much time to simply even just like put the warp on to set yourself up to create. But something that when I talk about sampling, I mean like basically doing tests, a series of tests that can lead you to understanding your how your materials will speak to the concept. And as someone who thinks of themselves as a nerd, I wouldn't be here if I wasn't a nerd. I tend to go down some deep rabbit holes about the materials that I use. Like these images here are little behind the scenes snapshots of a project that was really dealing a lot with, I've been thinking, I mean, as a lot of us, during this pandemic, maybe thinking a lot about grief and those I've lost. And so I've really been trying to think of different sort of grief and mourning practices that exist out there, and also just thinking about the life cycles and how seasons change. So it was the first time that I was really integrating natural life into my practice as a weaver. I didn't just, yes.
I was just going to say, so for you, the concept then at first was grief, and then that expanded into thinking about life cycles and how grief shows up or death shows up in life cycles. Is that kind of like the concept?
Yeah, well, I just wanted to, I'll just move to this next image to give you a sort of like a close up. But in thinking about grief and loss, and how in the context of the pandemic in North America, we have like we're having a disjointed experience of like what it means to process that grief. I've been thinking, because personally I'd experienced a significant loss, the loss of my grandmother who lives on another continent, and the heartache of not actually being able to be there for whatever process was obviously very difficult. But in thinking, being able to dive into a project that really allowed me to sort of like hone in on, okay, well, like, what am I really, like, if I could hold space in one way for myself, even just like a private way, like, what does that look like? And like, if I can, even if this morning practice is just for me, what does that look like? And I guess I was really thinking a lot about plants and soil and life and life cycles in that way, and how we're connected to each other. And so I had just done a deep dive into the different branches of like how materials can speak to the concept that I wanted to move with. Like, how is soil and a life force that carries memory? How can I integrate? How can the color of different plants really speak to the moment, like the seasonal moment that we're in within the fall? As part of my research for this particular project, I found myself really diving into different books, such as this one. I just wanted to share like a little excerpt of a quote that really helped to ground me in thinking of like soil in particular as a metaphor to sort of speak to loss in like in a bigger thematic way.
So books definitely being another source of inspiration and research. So your research first sort of into the different elements and materiality of the materials you're working for, and then sort of turning to books. Is that sort of like your, I guess, first input, do you find, in your process? Or is it internal reflection first?
It may come from a space of like internal reflection. And then like in being in dialogue with like my sketchbook, really just like getting keywords. That's something that Dr. Thompson brought up, like when you're going into a database, like it's very important to have those with you. And I guess and for me, when I start, like when I'm at the beginning of my creative process, I'll try to think of these sort of keywords, these key themes that I'm trying to explore, and like do a deep dive into like seeing who's been, what sort of like trail of thought like sort of connects with this, which will then kind of inform like me finding a book like this. So, and thinking about soil, memory, it's kind of how I found this book through a friend, and was just like, yeah, really going through the index, looking up if there were some keywords of like what I was looking for that would exist that may be relevant. And yeah, that's something that really informed me.
And when you say index, are you referring to the index in the book?
Yeah, the index in the book. Yeah, I highly recommend really like flipping through, be a close read, it's not, don't be intimidated, but I encourage people to be a close reader of like different resources that they come upon. Yeah.
Yeah, when you said index, I was like, oh yeah, the index, I forgot about that. I think that's such a sort of great tip to think as folks are thinking about keywords and other places for inspiration to continue their research.
Yeah. I wanted to share little bits of process from a research sort of like essay that I wrote collaboratively. As a person who, my practice, I work with clay, but in the times where I'm not necessarily like really active in a studio making, like I'm still like thinking about like the context in which work is being made. And I was in dialogue this time last year with an amazing woman named Natalie Batreville. She curates an online Instagram actually called like Black Ceramicists. And around this time, like last summer, we were thinking a lot about how do we apply sort of, or think of in the conversation around abolitionism and access, like how can those things be applied to like how we can access clay spaces, and it led us to having a back and forth, like we co-wrote a piece together, and also just like shared a Google Doc basically for like quite a few months, basically copy pasting links to different sources, like creating like different mind maps of like thematically where ideas would go around here. I just wanted to share just different like keywords that would then lead to like going down a Google search, or like finding maybe like an academic paper through like maybe my school's database, or going on different like open access spaces. But I would say that when it comes to searching for these kinds of things, like it's quite open, not necessarily in, I would say like I access like some quite public archives and a mix of like university archives for these kinds of things.
And then did you folks just like literally share the links and then have conversations, and then that led to the writing process? Like, can you tell us a bit about how you actually went about this collaboratively, which is pretty cool?
Yeah, it honestly started in the DMs.
Yeah.
And which led to phone conversations, which then just led to like, I think we have to put this, like, we should start writing this down. And we had started a shared Google Doc essentially. And like maybe every like 2 weeks, we would like check in on like where we were at, or where our thoughts were. But it was like a feedback, like, I think honestly, before we started writing the real thing, we had like 20 pages of just notes of like a typed up draft with that different links, things highlighted, like comments of like, oh, have you checked this out? And yeah, I would definitely say that this idea of like collaborating in that way, collaborating thoughtfully and intentionally, even across distance, is it's possible when you find somebody who you trust, who you're and who you're aligned with. Yeah.
That's beautiful. And such a great reminder that these technological tools can really help with that collaboration in terms of hearing you had a system, you were systematic, you had all your links in one place and your mind maps in one place, which helped to to facilitate the process, which Cheryl was talking about. So bringing the systems to life. Yeah, let's see your next project.
Oh, I just wanted to to share a little an example of a public archive that I've visited. It's called the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture, and it's actually like a branch of the New York Public Library in New York City. And I had gone in initially to see an exhibition. But I didn't necessarily go explicitly with the intention to research, but was definitely blown away by the access in this particular space. When I was there, just visiting for the afternoon, I was able to create. Even though I don't live in the United States, you can create a library card that will last you for like 3 months. And the books that I had found, I took a list of all the books that were relevant to a question that I had, and was also notified by the amazing librarians there that like they could scan up to like 50 pages for me of the different pieces that I had selected for myself. So yeah, I would, if you do have, when you do go to an archive, public or private, and you're prepared, you never know what kind of supplementary services that these librarians, these technicians may be able to support you with. So yeah, I just wanted to share that little nugget.
Major key alert. That's amazing. Sounds like preparedness is really a key part of being able to extract all the resources out of the archive.
Totally. Yeah, but this leads me to my final slide, which is a snapshot of one of my latest projects. It's called the Library of Infinities. It is currently taking place at SAW Gallery in Ottawa, Ontario, and it's up for a couple more weeks. And essentially, the Library of Infinities is a crowdsourced library of books predominantly by Black and Afro-Diasporic writers. It's a continuation of a project I began in 2018 that was originally called Black Libraries Matter, that took place in Halifax, Nova Scotia. Then I was very active, like co-facilitating reading groups around political, just like alternative political reading group type things that were co-facilitated with different collaborators. And in having that kind of amazing, supportive, generative space, like it would definitely wanted to see like, okay, how can we actually create an immersive, dynamic environment that can not just be a space for us to read and to congregate, but also we can drop off our own books that may be relevant to us. You know, the criteria initially was I was reaching out to different local activists that I was in community with, or teachers, friends, artists, about different books by Black authors, Afro-Diasporic Caribbean authors who have moved them to some capacity. And if you could see them in one particular space, what would they be? I still have similar questions when it comes to asking people for books that can be in there. But in the context of this, in this current iteration that takes place in Ottawa, and acknowledging that bilingualism is more of a thing here than it was for us than it was when I was exploring this in Eastern Canada. A part of research that went into this exhibition was doing a little bit of investigating for different French publications, whether they're like Haitian writers or Black French diasporic countries, which publishing houses based in Canada have books by these authors. So that was one aspect of researching for this project that was different from the first iteration.
And how did you find that process of reaching out to the publishing companies, and did they provide the names, or did you have to do sort of preliminary work to see if artists were represented by them?
It was really interesting, actually. Like there was sometimes there was one particular publishing house that would they got back to us with like a huge list, but it was, they maybe got back to us with books that were edited by non-Black authors. And I was like, no, it's actually important that it's not just an anthology curated by a non-Black academic, or that is still an important criteria. So like weeding through those, like people were excited to support and help in that way, but ultimately we had to still scan through to see like, is this actually in alignment? Because there's still important details, you know, and
yeah, and the sort of philosophy that you're taking, right? They're like, oh, there's a Black voice here, and you're like, no, the entirety of the subject matter needs to be brought forward by a Black person. So interesting form of investigation that went into this process. It's a beautiful exhibit, and I do hope folks, if they're in the area, they're able to go and see it, as it's still up at the Saw Gallery for the next couple of weeks. There was a comment in the chat that someone had as well read your piece in Canadian art and said it was beautiful. I think it's owned partly. And yes, Canadian art is no longer around, but I mean, now I guess it's also an archive, you know, it's an archive that's still available in that sense. So shout outs to the internet for continuing to create access. Are there any, before we get into any questions, of course, if anyone has any, they can put them in the chat or Q&A, but are there any questions or research topics that you're currently inspired by?
Okay, well, like when I had gone to the Schomburg, the one research, I'm kind of obsessed with thinking about, there's this, when it comes to like the history around like clay pottery in America, I'm really curious about the potters who've worked on, formerly enslaved potters who worked on plantations but didn't sign their names on pieces. There's like there's one predominant name that comes up often of like potters around that era, and his name is David Drake, and there are quite a few books on him, but I'm very curious to like just dive deeper into his work and sort of what people have said. I'm just curious to see like the web around him as like a jumping point. Like there's one artist that I like, his name is Theaster Gates, who's done some amazing like research, like responsive work about David Drake. And yeah, so like working in textiles, it's very common for me. I know a lot about the history of like cotton as it relates to capitalism and black. But I'm very curious about the narrative around like clay and Black folks' roles in that kind of industrial labor. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that, Shaya.
No
I feel
problem.
like you've gone over so many different inputs and techniques, whether it's the material you're actually working with, to engaging with your peers and colleagues, of course, internet-based research, and all of that to pour into beautiful pieces. And it seems like folks are interested in hearing more from you. So thank you so much for sharing in this session. And we'll definitely be sending out a survey at the end of the session. So if you want to hear more from Shaya, do put that in, or there are other topics you want to explore, please do put that in the survey. Thanks, Shaya.
No problem.
And now we will go into part 2 of Cheryl's presentation. I'm going to call Cheryl back up. Hello.
I wasn't sure actually if we were taking a break, but we're going to go right in.
Right in.
That works for me. Okay. Hi, everyone. I am back. Thank you, Shaya, for that. I learned a lot. And I also shared many experiences because I too have done work at the Schomburg. And being systematic definitely helped. Let's put it that way. Okay, so let's get back into the presentation. So that was the end of part 1. That's where I left off. And now, as you can see, we're moving into the start of part 2, and the image of chess pieces has remained the same. But this is part 2. It wasn't a typo. And so what are we doing in part 2? Well, let's see. Remember where we left off, right? You had just left the archive. You found something. It's a miracle. If anyone's worked in archives, you know, you could be looking at a big stack of boxes and a big stack of a whole bunch of stuff, and you basically found one item. Now, some of you, if you've experienced that, before today's presentation, you might have been upset that you only found one item. After today's presentation, I want you to stop feeling upset and always focus on what you find, not what you didn't find. So if you found one thing, that is the thing, and now we're going to work with it. So you found the thing. How do you figure out what to do with it? Like, what next? You have all your questions that you prepared and you went in with, and now what do? You have your methods. First of all, before you just go into your methods, I want you to relocate yourself in your form. What is your artistry? Shaya just told you about their work with clay. They're very clear, their work with textiles and various things, and sort of being immersed in a particular form. It is very important, if you are creative, to never lose sight of your creative form. And always think of the archive as an extension of your form, not as an additive. It is an extension. It is thinking and working within what it is that you do. It's the same stuff I showed you from before. So you went into your archive, you have your questions. Say me, you know, I write nonfiction typically. And so every time I go into an archive, I'm thinking about how I can use what I found to delve deeper into history, to tell deeper, more complex stories about history. And so for me, that's how I'm always thinking about the archive, that it's just delving into, I am back to the future, okay? Every time. Just as a side note, if anyone has seen Back to the Future 2, you remember that scene where the guy, what's his name, Biff, goes into the future, gets the book, the almanac, so he can figure out all the sports events from 1955, goes back into 1955, becomes this million gazillionaire, and he's a horrible, evil person in the bizarre world of 1955 because he had all the answers. If you haven't seen it, go watch it. It's a genius movie because the point of the archive is not to have all the answers. I want to free you tonight in this session to understand that is not the goal of going into the archive to find everything. No, the goal is to find something, and then to think of your form, and to remember your questions, and then to lean into the systematic methods that you're going to use to make sense of what it is that you found. And that leads us into the next thing, and that's ethics. Because someone actually put a question in the Q&A about if you got verbal, confirmation, is that okay? No, it's not. And the reason it's not okay is because ethics, I think somebody has unmuted, you want to mute yourself. Ethics is literally about right and wrong, right? What you ought to do. But as I've said here, that's not always clear. Understand that ethical questions around use, around copyright, around reproduction, sometimes it's just not clear. So what I've found for you all on this wonderful thing called the internet is a very short, under 2-minute video that kind of sums up a little bit Ethics 101. We're going to watch the video, and then I'm just going to go through some best practices that I also like to carry. As we watch the video, I want to make sure I'm going to put on the captions because I know sometimes that really does help people. But I see the captions aren't working. My apologies, but it is pretty explanatory. There's a lot of text, so you can still follow. Yes, thank you for watching. And I also want to thank that video for that horrible music. I apologize. I should have apologized in advance for that jingle. But I just like the video because at the core of ethics is understand that you as a researcher have a responsibility. Anytime you do research in any archive, public, university, private, you have a responsibility to yourself, to the whatever it is, the organization, the person, the institution, and to the persons or people who are connected to the collection that you're looking at. And so why ethics matter is because you always want to remember that. Remember I said in the first session, so much of this work is about relationships. And when you're in a relationship with, and we have many different types of relationships, the main key to any relationship is what? What is a word that is central to any relationship? Elvina, close, respect, communication, Paige Fitzpatrick. Thank you so much. Communication, respect and trust and integrity matter too, but communication is what keeps it together. So part of ethical practices in the archive is being able to communicate. You communicate that you would like to reproduce something for your art or something, right? You have to communicate that to someone. Then you have to get the parameters of use. You have to ask the question, can I use this for this? Is there a fee attached to this use? Then they might say, yes, there is. First, when you ask, can I use this? They might say, well, you know what? I'm not the copyright holder. You have to find out who owns the copyright to whatever it is that you want to use. Sometimes you think because it's housed in an archive, they own it, but they don't. Remember, archives are really just repositories. The copyright is still held with whoever it is who produced the image or the thing. So you have to find out who produced the image or the thing, and you have to go direct there to get permission for use. Then it might be that once you get permission for use, the archive is actually in its power to then grant you use or reproduction for a fee. Sometimes it might be free, but often there is a fee associated. And the fee structure, you can find that out on the actual archive, or if not, when you're in communication with them, you can ask for a fee structure, they will give it to you. And it really does depend on what you're using it for, right? Is it a live performance? Is it for reproduction in a book? Is it for the web? Is it for print? There are many different parameters, but you have to get clear. And part of asking who the copyright holder is, in my opinion, is also showing a respect for the descendants of that thing or person. It's a respect for the people who are connected to it, not the institution where you found it. So you found it at a university archive, that's great. But if it's a family record, it's actually showing a respect to the descendants of that family, not the institution. So I think that's where people get a little twisty with their ethics because they think it's where they found it. No, no, no. It's who produced it and who actually donated it to the collection itself. So you just always want to get clear on that. The next thing is the item connected to a public person or public institution? You have to figure that out. And if it's a private person, sometimes you can just reach out to them and say, hey, I'm doing this project. Just, if you find an email or your contact, I'm doing this project. I'd like to use this thing that I know is connected to you or your family. Do I have your permission to use it? And often a private person is either going to tell you yes or no. Very rarely are they going to charge you a fee. They might, but typically it's the public institutions that will likely charge you a fee. And that fee is not, people think that they're making big money off the fee. No, often that's part of the contract that they signed when they took the collection in the first place. So some of that fee might actually go back to the copyright holder. I don't know the dynamics of the fee structure, but understand that you just want to be clear. I hope in this part of the session, what I want you to take away is that clarity is what gets you success as a researcher. It's when you don't want to ask the question, you start to be a little bit shady. You're not telling people exactly what you're doing it for. That's when you just find yourself in hot water and you get into ethical issues. Be clear about your use, be clear about your questions, and when in doubt, ask questions. I also hope you take that away from this as well. Don't feel like there's any question that's too simple or stupid when it comes to archives. There's no stupid questions. So just lean in and always remember to ask your questions. And so that's what I want to say about ethics, because otherwise we get into a rabbit hole of ethics that can be quite boring. And it's almost 8 o'clock on a Thursday. I want to keep y'all awake. Okay. So we're going to keep it rolling. We're going to keep it rolling now. And this is where we get into the last little part where I literally am going to show you how you would look at images and get to your questions that's going to lead you into an archive. First of all, understand you're using an artifact, as a roadmap for your archival work. You find something, it is a roadmap. It is the thing that is going to lead you to where you need to be. It is not the thing itself. So there were 3 images that were submitted. I'm going to read these images now live. I mean, you don't understand how I've been living for this all day long. Like, and when I looked at the images, I started to get so excited. I'm like, this is like me testing my chops, but it's also showing you how you would start to look at an image and where you would go to read them. So here's the first, and I would say each of the images I'm going to show you, each of them are on a scale from a lot of information to basically nothing. Okay. So the first image that was submitted, there's a lot of information to go off. This is what was presented to me, right? You have a title, Twisted Mass Hamilton, a photograph of the spiritualist medium Mary Marshall, who is excreting a teleplasmic discharge from her nose during a seance at Dr. Thomas Glendenning Hamilton's house in Winnipeg, Manitoba, taken August 5th, 1928. That is what we call lots of details. And so an image like this, the first thing to know, I just know this from my own historical breadth of knowledge. In the 1920s, there was a new sense of spirituality that was related to speaking to the dead. That was just a thing in the 20s, seances and the whole Ouija board stuff. All of that came in the 1920s. And so right away, knowing that, I would start to look into that practice in the city of Winnipeg in the 1920s, because I also have a location and look, I have an exact date. Then I would say, because we know the name of Mary Marshall isn't just random woman, I know now that I can go into the records and try and find Mary Marshall. It might be difficult to find the other people in this image, maybe, but if I can find details about Mary Marshall, maybe Mary Marshall has some estate records that include clients that might have gone to see Mary Marshall, and you can pinpoint through name and you could eventually find the people who are in this image. So remember, an image is always a roadmap that's going to lead you on a journey to answering questions. That's how you get to figure things out in an image. You can also see here in this photograph, there's some primitive media technology. You can see on the little ledge, if you had the image, what I would have done if I was looking at this, I would try to zoom in as much as I can and see if I can see an inscription of who is this made by? Is it General Electric? Who is it? Who is the maker of that object? And then I would go online and I would start Googling General Electric, sound technology, 1920s, and find out as much as I can. And then you might be able to trace back where that particular thing would have been sold in Winnipeg in 1928. What retail stores, because remember, there's no online shopping, so people are going into the storefront, right? What retail stores were in Winnipeg in 1928? Then you can start to get a sense of, okay, there is this retail store, 1928, not everybody has a car. Might Mary Marshall have walked to this place? Might Mary Marshall live in proximity to where that store was? This is how you start to piece together information from just looking at an image and not knowing much. And in terms of the ecoplasm thing, I would Google that too. What is going on? What is this teleplasmic discharge? I actually have never heard of that. Look that up. How common was that? Is Mary Marshall scamming these people? Is it all just a make-believe hoax? That's what I would say about that first image, because this is a lot of information to go off. And sometimes when you actually have a lot of information, it can actually not be a good thing, because you're already assuming that you know so much about this image because you have the names of Dr. Thomas Glendenning, but that Glendenning's Hamilton's house. If this person is a doctor, they would be easy to find in hospital records. How many hospitals were in Winnipeg in 1928? Again, do you see the questions that I'm asking? This is how you start to drill down and get very specific, because the image is a roadmap. It's about leading you on the journey. So then you can now go into, think about all the places I just noted. You're going into the hospital records. You're going into retail records. You're going into maybe estate records, wills. This is all very personal stuff. And all of this from a photograph. And then you're also going on to your best friend, Google. And if you can access the university databases, look up seances in the 1920s and look up the type of people that would have participated in seances. I bet you they were mostly white, middle to upper class, and typically there might have been a recent death in the family. So they were coming after a death. And since you know the specific date of August 5th, you can also figure out what is the significance of that date, maybe to Dr. Thomas Glendenning Hamilton. Might he be the person who has a loss in his family, why everyone is there? So the medium is actually at his house, right? So that's how you start to piece together the pieces. Let's move on to the second image. Got this image, young Olive. The only thing I know from this image, you can't really see it. Grandma, oh, is this you, E. Jones? Okay, E. Jones, get ready. I'm going to do my best with this one. It says, lovingly yours, Olive. Okay, first of all, you see Olive's outfit? This outfit, I marked this somewhere in the mid-20s to maybe early 30s. Roughly maybe 1922-3 to maybe 1934-5-ish. It's anywhere in that time period. And how do I mark this? It's the height and hem of the skirt, and also that this sitter is wearing stockings. Stockings were not commonly worn by women until the 1920s. And typically it was more toward the mid to late 1920s that women stockings were readily available. Same goes with that style hat. Typically that style hat, you see that style hat into the mid to late 20s, into the 30s. But here's where this image is really interesting, because that salutation, lovingly yours, Olive. The question that I would ask if I came upon this image is, how do you read lovingly? How do you read lovingly? Do you read lovingly as to a family member? Do you read lovingly as to a partner, like a romantic relationship? Do you, like, how would you read lovingly if you know the time period that this image was probably taken? You could just put your thoughts in the chat, like lovingly yours. Like, that's not really, like, when I read that, I wouldn't think that it was a friend. Like, I would assume that this was an image that was like, see, yeah, like I see Marin saying romantic relationship, but I'm actually not sure. So because I don't know, the first thing I would do with this image, I see Diana saying relative or family member. Yeah, that's possible. These are all possibilities. What do? You know that this image was likely taken some point in the 20s or maybe early 30s. Google it, everyone. I told you, Google is your friend. Google salutations, common salutations, 1920s. and then lovingly yours. Just put that in, you know, approximate date range, and see kind of what you get back. Then you can get a sense, oh, okay, this was probably a family photo. But here's the thing. When the photo was submitted, I didn't see the back of the image, but just looking at the decor in the image, this is for the chat. Would you say the decor looks, even for say this is 1927, would you say the decor looks a bit old fashioned? Even for that time, right? It looks old. It looks like 19th century. It doesn't match her outfit. Her outfit is very modern for the time period. The decor is not. And so what that says to me is that the photographer was probably an old person. This is probably an experienced photographer who had been in the business a very long time and had the same old tired backdrops that they used, and they were probably male, the same old tired backdrops that they used for photographs, right? And then they said, oh, come here and stand in front of you. If we see the back of the image, there would probably be some kind of stamp telling you where this photograph was taken. It was not taken in a home. This is clearly taken staged at some kind of studio. That's where you go on the roadmap to figure out the pieces of the puzzle. If you know where the image was taken, then you can easily find, if you know the location of this image, you can find business records that locate that photographer. No stamp on the back. Jones, you're killing me. No stamp on the back. Then what I would then do is try to go on other public archives. For example, if this image you believe was taken in Canada, now I know that I'm talking to E. Jones. Good, I can ask you questions. Was this image taken in Canada? Do you know? More than likely taken somewhere in Canada. Let's just say that it was. Go on other public archives that you know have historical photographic records that go back to the 1920s. The McCord Museum is one of them. The Nova Scotia Archives and Records Management is another one. There's a few of them across the country, even Library and Archives Canada. And you would want to specifically make your date range 1920 to 1935. And you want to just scroll through as many images as you can, portraits ideally, and see if you can match the background. Because I could just look at this and I can tell you this was probably a photographer who used this same backdrop for like everything, especially that curtain. If it was taken in Montreal, I can even lead you to a more clue. You want to look into the William Notman photographic archive at the McCord Museum. I have looked through that archive, and maybe that's why this is ringing a bell, because I've seen the decor that William Notman used, and William Notman was the most prolific photographer in Canada in the 19th and early 20th century until he sold the business in 1930 to his sons. Therefore, a lot of William Notman's images will have this very similar decor. And I can also tell by the tint of this photograph that it was actually taken by a very skilled photographer, because even though it's probably dated in the 1920s or early 30s, look at how you can actually see the details in this woman's face, her hands. If you can enlarge the picture as I did, you can see a lot of details. That means this was a very skilled photographer who understood lighting, because lighting was actually a very issue for many, many decades and still is, especially with darker pigment. So that's what I have to say about this one. I hope that was helpful, because there's some good stuff in Olive. And then there's the very last one, okay? This is the last one. This one is even more vague. I'm not sure who submitted this one, okay? Here's this one. All I know is Ron Nash, okay? But having looked at this one, the first thing you want to do when you get something like this is so vague. This is literally nothing. Forget Ron Nash. It's like, imagine you don't know anything. You have to look, you have to remember, fashion is a window into the past. Thank you, Elvina. That's exactly where I was going. Fashion is a window into the past. you see that the Black male, who is presumably father, mother to the right, 4 children. Ron Nash submitted, thank you, that's all I have. Perfect, so you're Ron. Are you in the picture, Ron? Or is this a family picture? No, Diana, it is not the 70s. That thin tie tells you that this was probably taken sometime between the late 50s and early 60s, mid 60s. I would say I wouldn't go past maybe even 67, and I would get maybe 57 to 67, because again, do a Google search, the history of men's ties, it will tell you that the thinning of the tie happened right there in that time period. By the late 60s and 70s, ties are wide. By the in the 40s and 50s, ties are also wide. There's only that gap in the mid-century, late 50s and early 60s that the ties of men slimmed. So that right there, you know, this is somewhere probably in the early 60s or late 50s. I pegged this image as being, as I understood that that's somehow Parliament buildings behind. That's what it looked like to me, that it was Parliament buildings, a family portrait, but it was a significant family portrait of maybe like an immigration photo, like people were leaving. The only reason I gauge this is because everyone is in their Sunday best, even the children. And typically when people went to get photographs of immigration, because I know this from my own family, they dressed in their family best and they looked like studio photos because they were leaving. And this is like the last hurrah. So they wanted to like leave out in a certain image. And so that's, now I can't tell you where this photograph was taken. I don't know, Ron, do you have a sense where this was taken? I want to guess British Isles or Canada or Trinidad. I knew it was somewhere there was a British connection. So of course, and it makes perfect sense because if you're leaving, and also typically for those who don't know, in Caribbean families, it was quite common where the eldest, I want to take maybe the boy child, typically would dress a little bit, not better, but there would be an emphasis placed on this person because of where they stood in the family. Hence why there's one child wearing a blazer and looking as if, and also I pegged that as like a school uniform. I didn't peg that as like just an outfit that they got. And so what you see in this photograph is, just looking at it, that's how I pegged it as an immigration photograph, is that I see a lot of sadness. I see shock and sadness and maybe not a joyous moment here. I don't see excitement. So that's how I pegged it as an immigration photograph. And so when you have these images, what I want you to take away from the talk today, Ron, that's all I got for that one. So I hope that was kind of fun to kind of see how a random person will kind of go through an image of yours and make all those comments, because I want to wrap up in time for 8, is that I really want you to take away from this session that everything is about process and system and steps and asking questions and really probing with your eyes what you see. And I like in your comment there, Ron, that they are exactly that, assumptions. The only way you get answers to those assumptions, right? The roadmap is when you start to dig and you go into the records. So from part 1, I hope you took away that there's systems and structures. There are actual methods that you can use that are not intimidating once you understand what they're intended to do. There's questions to ask before you do the work of the objects that you find, and then also in formulating your kind of methodology. And then when you get to the archive, don't be intimidated when you don't find anything. Lean back on your methods and your system and think about the other kinds of questions you'll ask when you go to the next archive, right? What is the takeaway? Ask your questions, do your research, and develop your own methods. You don't need a book even. Just Google discourse analysis and then make it up, okay? Lean in, be creative. You can have fun with methods. There's no set way to do it. In the second part of the session, what did we talk about? A little bit about ethics, communication, respect, honesty, and again, asking questions if you're unsure about something and who owns what and what you can actually use. The little fun exercise of reading images. What's the takeaway? Honor copyright before you use something that you found in the archive. And the final last words is become a sleuth. Archival work is like detective work. It's fun. I hope you found it fun. I hope my energy is like, man, I want that energy. Yes, I find this work exhilarating because you are making sense of something like those images that seem stuck in the frame. You are literally giving life to those people. I'm actually, Ron, still on your image. I almost envision myself making some kind of art based on that image. It was so exhilarating to kind of imagine those, just imagine yourself as that family, right? It's like you're getting into the bodies of people and you're trying to bring it to life. Yes, Ari, it is definitely CSI Detective. You got that right, but it's in living color. Okay. Not all that dark lighting that they love to use in that show. But anyway, thank you so much, everyone. That is I know that there are questions and I see that I rambled on right to the 8 o'clock hour. I'm so sorry about that.
Information, very engaging. The chat's blowing up. Everyone's loving it. We do have a couple of questions in the chat that I think are really quite great as well.
Okay.
One, just given the readings that you just did, question about, are you interested in fashion history specifically? How were you able to read these images? Have you cultivated that over the years from being in the archive? Let us know.
Yes, yes, and yes. I realized early on in going into the archive and especially studying beauty culture that I had to become aware of fashion, because fashion, today's world is a bit different, but as you go back into the centuries, fashion and hair were actually intimately connected. So I had to understand that. And so in doing that and looking through so many images, I can literally look at an image and say, I think that was from the 1870s, right? Like I actually know what dress was, the dress laws, for example, in the 1870s, because I've looked at so many images. So it's partly my own exploring, but then the more you do something, the more you gain expertise at it.
So that familiarity has made things familiar to you now that you can actually just look at an image and see it and read it.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I say I date myself. I can only do that for anything from 1860 onward. Anything before 1860, it's not really my time frame. So I can't, maybe a little bit to the 1820, maybe, but it's still a bit of a struggle. That's not really
a good long time. It's a good long window.
Yeah.
The second question is for both you and Shaya. Great question. Beyond using the archives for your art and without being exploitative, are there specific actions, processes, or spaces you take to work towards decolonizing the archives? And maybe it's more of a, I don't know if you can decolonize the archive, but in the approach of your work, how you incorporate processes or practices towards decolonization.
I mean, just quickly for myself, you know what, I don't even really look at it as a process of decolonization. I actually look at it as a process of giving voice to people who had no voice. So for me, I work on Black subjects in the archive, and they can be just these still subjects. Oftentimes I find images of that the person that I'm looking at is only described as so-and-so's maid or so-and-so's nurse. So they don't even have a name. They're just attached to. So for me, I want to bring voice to those people, because I know in their time, the things that they would have seen and experienced, they couldn't say anything about. So that's kind of my approach. It's more about agency and giving voice to the people
who would typically be ignored. It's beautiful. I love what you're saying too about looking at the gaps in the archive, not as gaps, but spaces and silences to unearth and add stories to. So I think that's another way of an agency and inserting ourselves back into places where we've been ignored and pushed out of. Shaya, what about you?
Yeah, if I could add to that, I definitely resonate with the truth of like, yeah, having in unearthing, find like giving voice to, and also there's something that Dr. Thompson had said of just like taking your your role in as as an artist or researcher who dives into the archives, you truly can see it as a political project in itself, you know, like what are the access, what have been like the barriers to access what are now public archives, you know, like and really understanding the power of that agency to navigate with a question of your own, I think is maybe one of yeah, I don't think in not necessarily like decolonizing the archives, but like in thinking of your approach or like really taking owner or understanding the weight of like the fact that you have this space in the here and now to access them. I think that's something I think about a lot.
Beautiful. We all have this agency, so gotta use it. And I'm definitely hearing folks or seeing folks in the chat echo that. I love how E. Jones said, here, I want to give voice to Black achievements in history that gets unlooked or dismissed, overlooked and dismissed. Thank you. So with that, it's 8 o'clock. I think we've had a really rich conversation, lots of lessons, lots of folks reflecting and exciting about the tips and tricks, and looking forward to reviewing this video again on our YouTube. So we've gotten a lot of questions about whether or not it will be available. It will. We will upload it to our YouTube in the coming weeks, and we'll send out a notification to everyone that's registered with the link to our YouTube, as well as a survey. We're going to be doing more sessions like this, giving folks tips and tools to conduct inspiration, or to find inspiration, to conduct research, to get into the archive. We may be organizing a trip to the archive in the coming weeks, months, so stay tuned. And if you're interested, make sure you sign up for NIA Center's newsletter, follow us on Instagram at NIA Center, and make sure you stay in touch with our guest speakers as well. Shaya, I dropped her website in the chat, and I'll drop Cheryl's as well. And I look forward to seeing you folks on another session like this, extending our skills into research and the archive. Thank you so much. And thank you to our team working behind the scenes, Sani Kadom, who also helped to organize this session, everyone at the NIA Center team, and everyone, to all of you for joining in. Wouldn't be anything without you. So thanks so much for your engaging comments, questions, chat. It was fun. We can't wait to see you again. Until next time. Bye, folks.